You created this amazing tool that the what do you call it? Agriculture did not want. They kind of turned their back on you a little bit, didn't they?
Yeah, the food industry, they want to produce good product just like everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
but it can't be too good.
Correct. Well, they can't lose money at it. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, which totally makes sense. And we actually had, once we launched it into the food industry in 2007, we actually had some people tell us, you can literally sample your way out of business, is basically how they put it.
Hey everybody, how you doing? What you are about to listen to now is an interview that I had with Jared Bradley. All right, he is the CEO of M-VAC Systems, a phenomenal tool used to collect DNA evidence. And before I sit here and tell you all about it, we're gonna listen to the episode so he can tell you all about it. Thanks for tuning in. Hey there, Jared. How you doing, my friend?
Doing awesome, buddy. I
Good to
appreciate
see
you
you
having me
again.
on.
Oh no, thanks for being on. Uh, it's been I only get to see you once a year over at CrimeCon, and it's always a good time. But I'm excited to sit with you today for a little bit.
Yeah, it's always good to catch up.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It is. So, again, for most of my listeners who don't know who you are or what M-VAC is, well, before we get started with the whole M-VAC system, which I find just and all of this DNA stuff so absolutely fascinating, tell us a little bit about you. Now, you grew up in Idaho, correct?
Right. Yeah.
The son of a rancher. Did you grow up on a ranch?
Well, my dad did. So by the time I came around, he'd already earned his PhD, and actually, I was about 10 when he finished it. But he had a PhD in microbiology and animal sciences, um, and so he was kind of off into the scientific community.
Right.
While we were growing up there in Idaho, we lived in Moscow, which is where that quadruple homicide happened. The 4 students from University of Idaho. My dad actually attended there. Yeah, horrible. So he attended University of Idaho initially, and then he got his PhD at Washington State, just across the state line. So, yeah, I spent most of my childhood in Idaho, and then once I graduated, went off to college and ended up at BYU in Utah. And so that's kind of, let's see. Once I graduated from BYU, though, I went active duty Army for a few years, and then lived in Tennessee and Alabama and Las Vegas, ended up in the pharmaceutical industry, and bounced around there for a while. So mostly in the West, lived in California for a year, and I was more than happy to get out of there. Geez, beautiful weather, but that's about about the only positive. And then I was doing hospital sales and stuff up in Spokane, Washington, and I was just kind of disillusioned by it. And so that's about the time that I was talking to my dad on the phone. And again, being growing up on a ranch, the one thing you don't really do to ranchers is complain. They really don't want to hear it. So I was telling him, I was just about my horrible life, and he was like, "Well, why don't you stop complaining and come work for me?" So, this invention that he'd been working on for 10 plus years, he finally was ready to launch it and needed some help with the sales and marketing. And so I was kind of a good fit. So that's how I ended up doing what I'm doing now.
Well, good. It was nice to keep it in the family. I'm sure your father loved that. So what we're talking about for our listeners now is the M-VAC system that your father invented, created, and It is a DNA collection device.
Mm-hmm.
Correct? Did I word that properly?
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds
Okay.
right.
Cool, cool. And he didn't actually invent it to collect DNA. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, being a, growing up on a ranch and being a microbiologist, in 1993 there was a big E. coli outbreak,
Uh-huh.
and especially on the West Coast. So anybody that is from California or Oregon,
Well, I remember that
that
was a
was a
big thing with all the fast food restaurants got hit hard
yeah.
really.
Well, it was one in particular that used to make their hamburgers to order. Like if you wanted a medium rare hamburger,
Uh-huh.
which I don't know why you would, but if you wanted to order it that way, that's how they would cook it.
Uh-huh.
So, E. coli, when it gets ground into the hamburger, if you don't cook your hamburger well enough so that the center portions of it reach at least 160 degrees, then the E. coli is still alive. And
Correct.
that's
Correct.
obviously what happened. So that hamburger got tainted.
Unlike a steak, once it's
Yeah.
ground in there, it's all throughout. A steak you can eat rare and be perfectly safe, but a
Yeah.
hamburger, if there's poison in there, it's poison all the way through.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's, and it grows really fast. So, um, yeah, that was horrible. It killed like 6 kids,
I remember.
made like 140 people permanent kidney failure, which means they, were on dialysis until they could get a
Yes.
kidney transplant. Yeah, it was brutal. So my dad saw that, and it really bothered him. He's like, "How in the world are we killing kids?" And so he started evaluating the problem. How all scientists do, and recognized that the collection on the the upfront collection was the weak spot. Both in the actual collection method, they use like a little 1x4 inch sponge, or and statistically, it's just ridiculous. It's kind of like saying, there's a dime hidden in your house somewhere,
Yes.
but we're not going to tell you where it is, and
Exactly.
we're
The whole
going to
needle in a
blindfold
haystack
you,
thing.
and
Yeah.
yeah, it's just one of
And when you
those
say
where
collection, the samples that they're going to collect in order to detect
right,
the pathogens,
right,
correct? Yeah.
yeah. My dad actually came up with the saying really that if you can't collect it, you can't detect it.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like everything. It's a garbage in, garbage out theory, where you know if you don't collect it up front, if you don't have a good sample going into it, then it doesn't matter how good the lab processes are. Uh, it's just not going to produce good results. And so once he identified that, then he said, okay, well, how do I get a better sample? How do I get down into the little nooks and crannies where the E. coli might be happening? And that's where he thought, well, if you want to get into the fibers of a carpet, you don't use a broom, you use a carpet cleaner.
Correct.
And
A
so,
vacuum. Yeah.
yeah, so the whole concept of spraying a solution down and then vacuuming it up is what he came up with. And then it took him a little while longer to you can't just collect it like on a shop vac, because then the entire shop vac, the hose, the where the water accumulates, all of that is now that's all contaminated. And so,
Sure.
how do you clean it? How do you isolate it? So that took him a little while longer to actually develop that. And yeah, so but eventually we came up with the M-VAC, and then he finally was able to commercialize it around 2006.
2006. And then, funny enough, if my research is correct, all right,
Where in order to say, yeah, it's 100%, E. coli free,
right,
the food would be so expensive, or you'd have to like nuke it, like
correct, yeah,
put it all in a big microwave, and then nobody wants to eat that. If you want to eat fresh food, then there's always going to be a risk. So that's just kind of the nature of the game.
yeah. So big meat, again, like I said, turned their back on you. They weren't interested in it, and it kind of, after all of this work, investment, time or the amount of time your father must have spent on this almost went down the drain, correct?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We were
Borderline
really,
bankrupt. You were
we were
out
in
of
a
it.
tight spot. I
Yeah.
mean, it's when your primary market that you think is going to be,
Hmm.
the biggest user of your product, then they turn around, they basically say, that's going to collect more than what we want to find.
Right.
Um, yeah, yeah. For a solid year and a half, we were seriously worried about whether or not we were going to survive as a company. And
Who came up with the idea of the DNA then?
well, amazingly, before my dad died,
Hmm.
I going through all of his notes and stuff. Um, Forensics was actually an area that it was kind of on the back burner, but he
Hmm.
had actually thought of it. I didn't learn that till later, but it was pretty amazing. We were just sitting there. I was actually talking to my chief operating officer, and I was in his office, and we get this phone call. And well, let me backtrack. When I ran into a college buddy around 2000, I don't know, 9 or 10, something like that. And when I finished college, I went into the military, and he had gone into the FBI.
Hmm.
So we caught up. I don't know, what is it, 15 years later, and we were just talking about what we're doing now. And I was explaining the M-VAC to him in the context of collecting E. coli
Hmm.
and the food adulterants, and he was like, wow, something like that would have been amazing on some of my crime scenes. And so we're like, okay. So we took it to a lab here in the Salt Lake area, and asked them to test it for us. And they took it and created this comparison validation and to the current methods like swabbing. And when they came back, they were like, we've never seen recoveries like this. So
Interesting.
yeah, they were like, yeah, and by the way, we're buying that machine from you.
Cool.
So
Very good.
so they
So
were,
now your father had the idea, but kind of
yeah.
as a secondary market.
Uh-huh.
Did your FBI friends influence or question, was that before his passing or after the fact? The passing of your
Well,
father.
yeah, I mean, so my dad passed in 2009.
Mhm.
So it didn't really, yeah, that was after he had passed.
That's a
Um,
shame.
and so it was all kind of in there. And, um, I mean, we learned about it and started exploring it right at the exact right time, because prior to that, we were so focused on the food industry that I just don't even think we even, focus.
Right.
It's like we were so confident that the food industry, especially the beef industry, was going to use our product, that,
Well,
the system, that we really weren't interested in exploring other areas too much. Um,
I can see that because again, even for your father, he had the thought, but it was a secondary market, and you
yeah.
had yet to conquer the first market.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, we didn't want to spread ourselves too thin.
And now,
Uh,
again, correct me if I'm wrong or tell us the story of, um, you almost, I don't want to say reluctantly, but kind of accidentally hired a young lady who kind of helped turn this around for you, if I'm not mistaken, right?
well, we never officially hired her, but yeah, what happened, and that's back to the story where I was,
Well, I
sitting there,
remember it
and
as an interesting story or an interesting
yeah.
point. So,
Well, okay, so this lady named Carol, she worked at the lab that we had test the system,
mhm.
and they came back and they were like, we've never seen recoveries like this. Well, she was there, and so here we are, fast forward, a few years. She no longer worked for that lab, and she just called us out of the blue. I mean, it was totally, we had no idea. And she was like, hey, are you guys looking for any salespeople?
Mhm.
Well, what she didn't realize was that literally we were sitting there talking about how, if things don't turn around, how are we going to basically liquidate the company? And that's kind of the phase we were at. And we were in desperate straits.
That was a scary spot to be, man.
We get this phone call just totally out of the blue, and she's like, are you looking for any salespeople? And we're like, here we are, close to going bankrupt, and we're like, no, we're not hiring. Not a good time. So, but after we hung up with her, we were talking about it. Like, that was weird. So I was like, well, let's call her back and see what she had in mind, and maybe she'd work for a commission instead of actually just working straight up for a salary kind of thing. And so we called her back and said, hey, would you be interested in doing it this way? And she's like, yeah. So she was basically our first in, and she taught us how to talk to crime labs and CSIs and kind of what the whole forensics industry was all about. And yeah, she literally saved us. I mean, that phone call, and what inspired her to call us out of the blue.
Well, I think
particular day. And
I think God or somebody smiled on you. Maybe your father smiled on you that day and made that phone call for you. That's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's nothing short of the hand of God that saved us. Yeah.
Good for you. Good for you. Good for us. Good for the world. Now, so basically at this stage you're really, M-VAC now is officially a thing, right? And that's about what, 12 years ago? Am I right?
Yeah, 2012 is when we pivoted into forensics.
Okay, so 12 coming into 13 years now. Good.
Yeah.
Good. How many? Do you have any idea how many countries, how many municipalities are, now using the M-VAC system?
That's really an interesting question, because what has happened is, a lot of agencies have purchased, and they have their own system.
Well, I remember you telling me it was tens of thousands, whatever it was.
Well, there's tens of thousands of actual M-VACs.
Correct.
So you got to understand the difference. So the M-VAC is the actual collection device. That's a one-time use. The M-VAC, everything together is the M-VAC system. So just kind of to separate there. So M-VAC systems are, there's several hundred around the world, and in the United States is picking up fast. And there's systems there's a few systems in Europe. There's a bunch in China and Thailand and South Africa. It's so we've spread out that way. South Korea, but the U.S. is definitely our biggest market.
No, I would imagine so.
As far as right now, and it primarily just because we are so good at helping with how the U.S. does it. Europe's a little different. They look for more of the free DNA, which, if that makes sense, it's DNA that's not in the cell anymore.
Okay, can you explain that a little bit?
Anyway, kind of getting in the weeds there, but
okay.
The key is the U.S. is really our primary market. Now, what has happened is a lot of private labs have purchased an M-VAC, and they offer that as a service. And so lots of agencies have used that, like say they only have like one or two cold cases. They're a smaller agency. They don't want to buy it themselves. They can go to these private labs and get the service done. I mean, it's expensive, but if you just have one or two cases and you really want to get them solved, then that's a great way to do it.
Yeah. And so there'll be, again, private companies that have the system, and they, you buy them for the day or for the case, I should say.
Yeah. And some of there are some counties, like a bigger county will buy it, and then all the agencies that are in that county then bring their evidence to the county and where the M-VAC is, and then they can use it that way. And so there's a lot more agencies that are actually using it than have actually purchased the system. So there's so many cases out there.
So now you really, it's used all over the United States, all over North America, worldwide now. It's all over the place. And I'm sure I'm going to ask you because I want to know, and I know our listeners will know, but you won't. There's no way you're going to be able to answer it. But do you have any kind of estimation or guesstimation on not only how many bad guys you've caught using DNA, but how many good guys have been exonerated using DNA? Any? I mean, because you have to get. I assume there's some kind of reports that come back to you. No, do you
No,
hear back from these people or nothing?
a lot of times I don't.
You don't. That's a shame.
That's oh, we if we could figure out a good way to actually get feedback from the law enforcement agencies that use it successfully, man, I'd love that.
Yeah.
You know, we do have friendships and good enough relationships with a lot of these agencies that when they do get not only a successful profile, but especially if it helps solve a case, then yeah, you know, sometimes they'll do press conferences, things like that, and they'll hopefully throw us a bone and mention, you know, how they solved it with the M-VAC. There's a case in North Aurora, Illinois. They had a big press conference, and they actually used a private lab. And so DNA Labs International was there, and they made the announcement, and they brought up the M-VAC. And so we really appreciated that, just because, you know, as a small company, it's when you get little bones thrown at you like that, it's really nice. But, you know, just being able to solve cases in Virginia and Florida and all over the country is just phenomenal.
Oh, there's a lot of gratification, I'm sure, that comes with that. You know, the knowing that you know that your machine took part in something like that is phenomenal. It is. Like I said, I know on our end, you know, on the police end, you know, we can have all kinds of sad stories, but nothing makes you happier than when you put the handcuffs on the guy. You know, that's always a great day. It's always it's always a high point of a case. So,
yeah, I doubt I'll ever be able to do that, but you know, just getting a phone call from a detective like you, just saying, hey, you know, we caught this guy. Let me tell you a little story,
please.
So Montgomery County in Texas is right. It's kind of northeast of Houston, and I want to say in 1977, somewhere around there. I'd have to get the number right, but the case was when they finally used the M-VAC on it. The case was 43 years old.
43.
So,
wow.
Yeah, basically, what happened was a young girl named Lisa Jackson was swimming in this. It's kind of a small lake that was, it was really close, right? Like right next to the neighborhood that she lived in. So her home was probably only 300 meters, maybe 400 meters from this lake. She was there swimming with her brothers, and the brothers said, hey, you know, we're done, let's go home. And she said, you know, I'm going to stay here and swim a little longer. Well, the crazy thing is, as the brothers were walking home, and again, this is only like 300 meters.
Right.
So as they were walking home, this truck goes flying by them and almost hits them. So, but what they didn't realize is that their little sister was in that truck.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, by the time they left, so obviously this guy must have been, you know,
he was stalking them.
Yeah, he was stalking them, or, you know, casing out the lake. I don't know what he was doing, but it wasn't very long after they left that he snatched her up, and she was at there's a little intersection right off of the lake, and that's where he grabbed her, threw her in the truck, and then drove just a few miles away to a little service road where he raped her and killed her. They found her about 6 days later. Some oil field workers found her, and I just can't imagine coming up upon that. But
no.
Yeah, so that was a long time ago. So they had she was wearing a t-shirt and a swimsuit and a pair of shorts and like flip-flops. So, but the t-shirt and, you know, her clothing had been ripped away from her, and was a few feet away from her body when they found it. So the good news is the clothing, her clothing had been not only ripped away from her, but it wasn't close to the body, and so it wasn't contaminated with her decomposing and all of that. So,
Right.
as you know, as a detective,
as fresh as it could be.
Yeah, that's really important that it's because once it gets all saturated with the victim's DNA, then a lot of times you just can't get any kind of a suspect profile off of it. It's just it's really hard to separate the two. So, but over the years, the FBI and multiple labs had tried to get profiles off of it, and really didn't get much of anything. And then finally, they were able to use the M-VAC, and they got a full profile. So, and it was actually a guy that was he was a serial rapist and killer, and he had been caught on a different murder, and Texas had executed him like in 2001 or something like that. So, but they finally were at least able to solve the case. But
we knew what happened, right?
Yeah. It took them 43 years, but at least they did. They got it done.
You just touched on something that I'm interested in. Okay, two things actually. One, if you can explain. Now, I know again, and we just touched on a little bit, how the M-VAC kind of works almost like a carpet cleaner, right?
Right.
So you're shooting a solution into whatever it is that you're testing, because it could be a perfectly hard surface too, right? You could, a hard wall or a rock or a piece of metal, anything, right?
Yeah.
And then it sucks that liquid back into the machine to test, correct?
Right.
I've described it properly. Okay, so people know exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Now, with that little wand that you have, and again, I'm familiar with it, and we'll put a picture up so everybody can see it. With that little wand that you have, can you do multiple surfaces with that, or is the wand good for one test? And so if you had 3 or 4 different clothing items, would you use that? And if I'm using if the word wand is incorrect, correct me, please. The thing that actually does the vacuuming. Can you use one on several surfaces, or is it one and done?
Well, that's going to be up to like the investigative team.
Okay.
You can use one and combine those, but usually you don't.
Okay.
You want to use a clean one with each new piece of evidence or each new area, just so that you really know exactly where the
to isolate it as
came
much
from.
Correct.
Yeah, because it's once you do that collection, then everything that has DNA in it is contaminated.
Correct.
And so
that's what I assumed, but I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
And then also, what are the I guess I want to say the points of accuracy. So if I can again relate it to a fingerprint. So if we have a fingerprint, all right, no matter how good it is, you must have, and every municipality is different. Everybody does it differently across the country, across the world. But, for us, it was like 9, okay? 7 is great, but it's not 9, 5 is great, but it doesn't prove it's your fingerprint, How do they do that with DNA now? What makes it accurate?
Well, there's the interesting thing about the DNA strand is every single one of us has specific areas that are all along that DNA strand that are exclusive only to you. And that's what it's really a marvel when you think about it, that out of the 8 billion people that's on this earth, nobody has the exact same DNA strand as anybody else.
Yeah.
I mean, with the exception of maybe identical twins, they might have the exact same, but everybody else, there's certain markers along that DNA strand that is 100% unique to you. And that's what they look at. There's 24 specific places that they look at along the DNA strand.
Right.
And so every single cell that you have in your body, with the exception of like red blood cells, has DNA in it. And so your skin, your saliva, everything has DNA in it. And so wherever that DNA is deposited, if enough of, and you only need, I don't know, 10 cells.
Right.
So you figure
Amazing.
every single day we slough off about 400,000 cells.
Yeah, it's such amazing. It's so
Yeah.
amazing to me. I can't fit it in my head. I really can't. You know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
fantastic.
it's pretty wild.
Fantastic.
So if you're sloughing off 400,000 cells every single day, and somebody only needs 10 of them to create a good profile of you, then, you know, I don't think anybody will ever actually get convicted, you know, just based on DNA, but it's definitely a good lead.
Well,
And
it's a great lead. It's a great piece of evidence. Like anything, nobody ever gets convicted off of one thing. You know, you have to have multiple things to put it together to make your case. And something that is undeniable as DNA is a phenomenal. I mean, again, back in my time, it was never used. It was brand new, you know. But now I think it's brilliant. You are. Hey, how you doing? It's me again, another nobody, Travis Myers. And today we're going to talk whiskey. I know most of you think of me as an all-American patriotic type guy, and you are right. But when it comes to whiskey and drinking whiskey, which I do, I always go for the Irish stuff. And my choice when it comes to the Irish stuff is Powers Irish Whiskey. Established back in 1791. It's a triple distilled, oak-aged whiskey. Powers is simply magic. It also happens to be the #1 selling whiskey in Ireland, which has got to say something, because if it's good enough for the Irish, it's good enough for you. So the next time you raise a glass, fill it with Powers, and think of me, another nobody, Travis Myers. So not only do we catch bad guys, okay, with the M-VAC, which we love, because we all love getting bad guys, right? But you can also tell me a story. I can't remember, Angie something, okay, that you worked on that actually exonerated a person.
Yeah, so Angie Dodge was murdered in Idaho Falls, Idaho, in the mid-90s, and the guy that they convicted, somehow they got off onto this guy named Chris Tapp. He was only 18 years old, and he was it ran in the same circles as Angie, but so the interesting thing is she moved out, she would graduate high school, moved into her own apartment, and about 3 weeks later she was murdered. So just barely out of high school, which is just incredibly sad, but excuse me. So what happened was when she was murdered, they found a semen stain on her sweatpants, on her leg. Mm-hmm. And so they at the time, the DNA technology was good enough that if you had a big stain, like a big blood spatter or, a semen stain or something, but it had to be pretty big, like, the size of a 50-cent piece, definitely bigger than a quarter. And if you had that amount of DNA there, that the labs could actually determine whose DNA it was. Well, the semen stain did not match Chris Tapp, but somehow or another they I don't know, the way the detectives kind of hammered on him, they eventually got kind of a confession, and that's what he was convicted on. Now, the interesting thing about it, Angie's mom, her name is Carol Dodge. If you've never heard of this lady, talk about, and I'm sure, Travis, you've run into all these people that they, victims' families, where they just can't let it, nobody, it doesn't bother anybody more than the families.
Of course. Of course.
That a case isn't solved. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Carol,
you take a mother or a father's child away, that's their whole world.
Oh yeah.
You're a father, you understand that.
Yeah.
Your 100%. Kids are everything to you.
Oh yeah.
Especially the older we get. I tell you, at 60 now, I've turned into such a sentimental sap. and it's just I could never, I can't imagine.
Oh,
Being
yeah.
on that end of it. And I've seen my share of horrible things. But again, people don't often realize, or maybe realize enough, that a vicious crime, a murder, a rape, whatever it is, it's not just one victim. The entire family, the entire community can be victimized by it.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
but I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, no, I think that's awesome input just because it's, like I said, I don't think very many of us can actually fathom, the pain and the heartache and
Mhm.
just the anger. Um, I know that she was telling me that she when they convicted Chris Tapp,
Mhm.
she just couldn't be in the courtroom. She had to get up and leave. She
I
was
believe it.
just, I mean, I think if she had had a weapon that day, she could have actually. I mean, Carol is just the sweetest, nicest lady,
Mhm.
but I'll bet you that day she could have done some pretty bad things to Chris Tapp. Well, okay, so fast forward a little while, the most of the leads had gone kind of cold as far as that semen stain, the profile from the semen stain.
Yes.
And so, the detectives there in Idaho Falls PD, they had other things, other cases they had to be working on, and they had convicting.
Mhm.
They had a conviction, so they had one guy in jail already, and so they kind of let it go.
Oh, case closed. I understand that.
Yeah, yeah. But Angie's mom, Carol, just couldn't.
Mhm.
So she's actually went to the prison where Chris Tapp was and was trying to get Chris to tell her who the other person was, because if he was convicted but he didn't actually do the rape,
Correct.
then
Well, somebody
uh,
else's semen was there.
yeah, then he had to have known that
Mhm.
who the other guy was. And he had always maintained his innocence, and he's like, Carol, I don't know, I didn't do this.
Mhm.
Well, it took about 10 years of her visiting him periodically and him maintaining his innocence the entire time. Finally, I think it dawned on her that, hey, maybe Chris Tapp didn't do this.
Mhm.
And so imagine, after, this guy he'd been in prison for 10 years. And yeah, one of the main people that visited him was supposedly his victim's mom. And, throughout the entire 10 years, he maintained his innocence. He said, I didn't do this. I was wrongfully convicted. He had written letters to the Innocence Project and everything. So after a long time, I think it was about 13 years, Carol actually flipped, and she actually became one of Chris Tapp's advocates. And she was like, hey, you know what? I don't think he did this. And so that means that, that means that semen stain is even more important, because now that the guy that actually owned that DNA that actually did do it, he is
Yes.
running free. And a second tragedy is an innocent man is in prison. Well, it still took about 7 more years, but finally, the prosecutors and everybody, they said, okay, look, in order to get the finality about it, we've learned about this new testing method. Let's use that method. We'll find Chris Tapp's DNA on the victim's clothing, and uh, then we'll know for sure that, yeah, Chris Tapp belongs in prison. So, and
So
okay, just to
they're still testing to prove that this guy belongs in prison.
right,
Right.
that was the reason that they just to get Carol off of their case.
Yep.
That was the primary reason that they said that, kind of reopened it. Well,
Mhm.
we have to understand how brutal this murder was. So Angie lived in an apartment, like a second story apartment. So you had to go up this flight of stairs to actually get to her front door. Well, whoever it was that broke in, that got in there, she was in her sweats and a t-shirt getting ready for bed. She also slept. She had a teddy bear that she slept or that was on her nightstand that she always had there. Well, once she was raped, then she was also stabbed like 16 times, and her throat was slit. So now, in order to cover up the obviously Angie's screams as she was, I'm sure, being raped and stabbed, the guy had grabbed that teddy bear that she kept right next to her bed and had shoved it over her mouth and to muffle her screams. So, yeah, you imagine your 18-year-old daughter going through that.
No,
just
I will not.
Absolutely horrific. Okay, so they thought there was DNA on the teddy bear. There'd be DNA on her sweatpants, and they thought that Chris Tapp was actually helping hold her down. So most likely, especially around the ankles, which would be the sweatpants. So they originally said, let's test around the ankles of the sweatpants, and then I think she had a short sleeve shirt on, so it would have been her wrist, so which was gone. But especially around the sweatpants, that's where they wanted to test. Well, they used the M-VAC, and they got lots of DNA, but none of it was Chris Tapp's. It all matched that semen stain. So now they're like, oh, geez, okay. So then they sent it back another time, and they said, we want you to thoroughly go over these sweatpants. Like, we got to find DNA, Chris Tapp's DNA. We got to find his DNA somewhere. And so they, the CSI that actually did the collection took all the stuffing out of the teddy bear, laid everything flat, and just used the M-VAC just really thoroughly all over it. So did a thorough job. M-VAC the hell out of it is kind of what we the term we came up with.
The technical term.
Yeah, technical term there. And they found lots of DNA, but none of it was Chris Tapp's. It all met it all matched that semen stain.
That's not. So we're like 17 years into his imprisonment.
We're close to 20 now.
Close to 20. Wow.
Yeah, I think it was 18, 19 years, because they actually let him out at the 20-year mark. Okay. So, but it reached a point where they're like, well, this guy's been in prison for 20 years, and they gave him an Alford plea where, he had to still basically say that he could claim innocence, but he was still a convicted murderer. They did drop the rape charge, but he was still a convicted murderer, but at least they let him out.
Right.
Well, now they have a problem. So now they have a lot of DNA from all over, not only a semen stain, but DNA on the teddy bear, DNA on her sweatpants, that all matched the semen stain, but none of it matched Chris Tapp. So now they have it. It basically went from a semi-solved case to an unsolved murder. So now it's a cold case. So they didn't have any matches in the CODIS database, so they turned to the forensics genealogy, and through the genealogy, they finally found this guy, and he, as it turned out, you know how, Travis, they say that 95% of the time the suspect or the person that actually did it is in the case file.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
more
so
often than not, there's always, well, not, I mean, with the exception of your professional hitman and or your serial killer types, there's always a connection.
Yeah.
You know, there's always a connection there. And that's it. The trick is trying to find the connection. So,
Well, they finally found the guy, and he was living in the Boise, Idaho area. But at the time, he was literally living across the street from where Angie's apartment was. And they had actually interviewed him. He was standing there.
shakes.
Imagine this guy. That's one of the things about this industry, Travis, that, working in law enforcement, with, homicides and rapes and things, is that the audacity of some of these criminals is just off the charts. It's just crazy. And I can think of at least 2 cases in particular that the M-VAC has helped solve. But with this one, this guy, how once the police come and, they're going through the apartment and they have to get the victim's body out of there, and there's always a crowd around there,
And he was right there, wasn't he?
outside of the, the crime scene tape. And the guy that actually murdered her was there.
Yeah.
And because he lived right across the street. And so
that does not surprise me one bit.
Yep. And he was standing there and gave a statement to the police, and they just didn't, no red flags went up. And so they weren't even really looking at him. Well, fast forward 20 years, and turns out he was the one that did it. And in the meantime, he had gotten married. He had several kids, was living in the Boise area, and, they finally tracked him down. Another crazy thing was he was adopted. And so it took a lot of work to actually track this guy down. But they finally found him in the Boise area and arrested him. And he admitted that he did the whole thing alone. And so that further exonerated Chris Tapp. And yeah, but what a mess, this
terrible,
poor guy.
Story.
Yeah, Chris.
I don't want to interrupt you. I'm sorry if you had something else
go ahead.
to say. No, but I just saw on the news recently, right, that M-VAC is picking up a very famous and yet very similar case from the great state of Tennessee.
It's actually Arkansas. 3. Yeah, you're talking the West Memphis 3 case?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, West Memphis in Arkansas.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
West Memphis, I think that's the Mississippi River that goes right through there.
Correct.
Yeah, that's what separates Tennessee from Arkansas. So, West Memphis, the West Memphis 3, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know about that case. But they finally have gotten approval to test some of the evidence with the M-VAC. So the Arkansas Supreme Court basically said, if these guys want to continue on with testing, and if they're going to pay for it themselves, then no reason not to do it, to try to clear their name.
Yes.
Because those 3 teenagers were convicted kind of the same way that Chris Tapp was, where eventually they had to let him out just because there wasn't enough evidence to hold him, I guess. And so, but they're out with the Alford plea, but they want the exoneration. So,
and I don't blame them one bit. In fact, I never even understood the Alford plea, other than, I know exactly what it is, but other than somehow the court system can save face.
Yeah.
I really don't understand it at all. Either you're guilty or you're not guilty. You can't be both.
Yeah. I don't exactly understand it.
I never thought it was a fair thing. I never understood it. So,
just one of those, place and blame, I guess.
Yeah.
It's kind of spread it out a little bit. I don't know. It seems a little odd to me, though.
Yes. No, I don't. I really don't understand that at all. I don't. So, but with these cases, though, you have to gain, again, quite a bit of satisfaction yourself when this comes through, and it's you putting the effort forth to get this machine out there.
Yeah. Well, I learned it wasn't too long back to Chris Tapp. It wasn't all that long after he got out of prison that I learned through some of the guys with the Idaho Innocence Project up in Boise that he was going to be visiting them. And so I threw an M-VAC in the back of my car and drove up to Boise. And I was actually able to meet Chris Tapp there. And I interviewed him on my podcast a long time ago, when I first got started about 3 years ago. And he was one of the first people that I interviewed.
Interesting.
And that was an interesting discussion. But
well, there's something too. We haven't plugged it all. Is your All Things Crime podcast? So listeners, please, you're listening to me. This is a fella you got to listen to because he's got some really interesting stories on All Things Crime.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's I started All Things Crime just because of COVID. I couldn't go anywhere and sitting around thinking, man, I got to figure out a way to reach my customers, and so started All Things Crime, and here we are. I don't know exactly how many episodes. I think we're in 300 somewhere.
300 episodes. Wow.
Yeah. But on our YouTube channel, we have over 1,000 uploads. So we have a bunch of videos on there. So yeah, lots of cases and lots of discussions that people can go through. If and we'd love for them to follow us as well. That'd be great. So,
yes, please do, because it's a great show.
Yeah. But yeah, the Chris Tapp interview was really interesting just because watching him, and I remember when we were up in Boise and just watching him just kind of look at the M-VAC and kind of, I showed him how to use it and he was just kind of playing with it. But just knowing that his freedom in part was granted him because of our system, and the fact that he was innocent and 20 years of his life had been taken from him. I was always just absolutely amazed at how he was just grateful to be out. He wasn't overly bitter about it. He was just like, you know what? Can't do anything about it. And so I'm just going to get on with my life and make the best of his life. He was in prison. You think about what you were doing between the ages of 18 or 19. I think he was 19 when he actually got thrown in prison. Right. So between the ages of 19 and 39, think of those years and how much you did. Well, literally, how much you experienced, all the fun that you had, that kind of.
That is literally
those
the prime
20
of his
years.
Life,
Yeah, those are the 20 years that he spent in prison. All the while knowing that he was innocent.
That poor guy.
Oh yeah.
Awful.
So
awful.
Anyway, yeah, but it was amazingly satisfying just, knowing that we had helped him get out of prison.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. So where can people find out more about M-VAC and about yourself? And of course, obviously, All Things Crime, you find that right out anywhere you listen to your podcast, right?
Yeah. Well, obviously our website is m-vac.com. But you can also go to our YouTube channel. It's M-VAC Systems. And make sure to put the hyphen in there to find it. Our YouTube channel, but our website, we have a ton of information, a lot of cases that we've helped solve. And then All Things Crime is on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify. It's all over the place. So yeah.
All right, very good. Well, I think we're pretty good for today, my friend. Thank you so very, very much for joining me. I really, really want to thank you too. Okay, and I know it's a team effort over there, and I wish I could thank your father personally, but for all the invention of this machine and all the support it's giving to not only the law enforcement community, but the world as a whole. It's a phenomenal machine. I can't speak highly enough of it or what you guys do. And, it's kind of like that thank you for your service thing. Thank you so very much for M-VAC. We, the world, really appreciate it.
Well, yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. I mean, I wish my dad was still around, to see how it's being used, but I know he's watching it from the other side, and
Yeah.
I know he's proud of the things that we're doing. But yeah, it's any kind of justice that we can help bring to the victims around the world. It just there's nothing more satisfying than helping people get justice.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I always like to say when it comes to, well, what we all should be shooting for in this crime world, okay, is not even guilt or innocence, it's the truth. Finding the truth, in your machine, the M-VAC systems absolutely is a truth finder for sure, and it's great. All right, am I going to see you in September?
Oh, of course.
All right. I look forward to it, my friend.
Okay. Yeah. All right, buddy. Appreciate it.
Until then, all the best. All right.
Okay.
Take
care.
Talk
to you later.
There you go. Jared Bradley, everybody, CEO of M-VAC Systems. What an amazing tool this stuff is. And this whole DNA thing just blows me away. It's just too big to fit into my little brain, to tell you the truth. But regardless, until next time, thank you so much for joining. And remember, please, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and we'll see you at the next episode. Thank you so much. All the best, my friends. Listen up. This one's important. As a rule, I never stump for charities, because most of them don't hand out as much money as they collect. And that's a sad fact. But not Tunnel to Towers. These guys do the right thing. They have an A+ rating from Charity Watch and a 4-star rating from Charity Navigator. That's like the #1 charity watchdog group, with over 93% going towards the families of veterans and first responders who have lost their lives in the line of duty. For only $11 a month, and it's easy. Just go to t2t.org. That's letter T, number 2, letter T.org, and hit the donate button. Do the right thing and do good for the families and the veterans and the first responders who do good by you. It's only $11 a month. Thanks, and all the best.